the government really, I mean, the people that work in this, like either the agencies or intel, they really look at people like lab rats. I mean, that's just how I look at it, and it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I came to look at it a little bit different. I came to look at it like they looked at them like soldiers, like World War II never ended, and you know, just like the whole country mobilized to support the war, that all these people were patriots and that they were, unknowingly doing their patriotic duty or something. Like it was like you lose a certain amount of soldiers in war, and this is war. And I think they viewed the Cold War as war, and that they're going to lose some people. And you mentioned Fort Detrick. I mean, from my research, I don't know what you've looked at, Eli, but they weren't just doing stuff with drugs. They were testing bioweapons on humans in the United States. The actual, small doses perhaps, but not killing like whole cities or anything. But as they developed that stuff at Fort Detrick, they were running over to Georgetown and trying it out. And it's crazy.
Right. And your book does a great job of kind of walking through, from the title, Misguided Patriots. It's the folks who were doing this, as you tell in the story, think they're doing the right thing, I believe. And I think that's probably true for most everybody, that's in the military or any of these intelligence agencies or anywhere else, right? Like you said, they view it as a patriotic duty. The Cold War is going on. The World War II, in effect, has just shifted to the Soviet Union. And this is an existential crisis, right? We've got to defeat them. Otherwise, we're toast. Um, they're going to uh, nuke everybody, right? So he, under that logic, you can kind of see how you would say, okay, well, we're going to dose with these patients who are otherwise here for a dental cleaning uh, with a bit of radiation and see what happens. And, it's worth it. Right? We can't tell them, but it's worth it because otherwise we might all die. Right. So if otherwise we might all get nuked, that kind of justifies pretty much anything you want to do to combat
Well,
that.
interestingly, and this goes to what I mean, to what Tim was asking a minute ago, do I think that they're still doing this stuff? Uh, you know, my mom, who stayed involved with that whole, human experimentation stuff all the way through her time at UT, and she quits in 1992. And 1992 is the end of the Cold War, and that's when she's old, and that's when she's out. Cold War ends, she's out. And so I think that goes to what you were just saying, Eli. They looked at this whole thing as an extension. It was still all worth it. We could be nuked at any time. But then when the Cold War ends, that excuse goes away. So, and my mother steps away from it right then, and which may just be coincidence, you know, eh, but there's a lot of coincidences that happen in my family. And she steps away from it right then. And while I can at least em- empathetically go, you know, look at what they were doing and rationalize from their point of view why they might have thought they were patriots. After 1992, I don't feel that way anymore. I think that went away, and I think that is. I know a lot of people talk about 1963 when Kennedy is assassinated is when the whole government went berserk, and there was a coup and they took over and it all happened with Kennedy. There's That may well be, but those people were still in that patriotic mind frame during that time after 1963, justifying everything because of this massive threat. And so I agree with what you're saying that a lot of people could have been good people in their minds and such to keep doing these things during the Cold War. But after 92, what's the excuse now? It's not the Soviets anymore. What is it? And it seems like they just start war after war after 92 to give another excuse to last another few years to keep doing the same crazy stuff. It's like interesting to me that these little forever wars that aren't actually full wars immediately followed the Cold War. And that's when you hear about these things they're doing, it's all, they always have a new excuse of a new enemy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's interesting if you've, Tim's got it behind him. Blowback is a great book by Margaret Robertson. We've had her on and talked to her about it, about the Oklahoma City bombing. And, you think about the Cold War ending in 91, 92, and we, at least thinking back, we see a big shift to, domestic terrorists and international terrorists, right? We had Ruby Ridge, Waco, Oklahoma City. Our first Trade Center bombing was what, 93, 95. And then, of course, 9/11. It was kind of, we had this big threat in the 90s of homegrown, right? These lone wolf, Timothy McVeigh type terrorists who are going around. I think you're right. That you got to have a new boogeyman to go after and to
But I
fund
think
everything.
now, and it's just an opinion. I mean, I think they know that those aren't real boogeymen. I think the people back in the 60s and 70s really believed that the Soviets were an existential threat and really were worth anything at all costs to compete with them. These things that are thrown in front of us today, I think they know that they're not real threats to us, and I'm not so sure that these guys are misguided patriots, and that they aren't a little more devious than those people during the Cold War. And I don't have any proof of that. It's just my take on it.
No, I would agree with that take. I mean, certainly on the homegrown terrorists and even Al Qaeda, it's a scary thing, and it's easy to put onto the public, right, to justify things like the Patriot Act or increased continued spending in the military or intelligence and that.
But
But
they're never a real
those, yeah, those
major
guys.
military threat. I mean,
No, I do. The guys in the Pentagon or in the CIA or elsewhere think that Al Qaeda is going to wipe out their family. I don't think so. But yeah, you're right. In the 50s and 60s, I'm sure most of them probably did think nukes were going to be flying at some point.